Internet. Today I'm going to do a very special video because this month of October 2024 marks the anniversary of 10 years of psychotherapy that I provided psychotherapy to patients. 10 years about perhaps I've met 500, 600 individuals, thousands of hours of work, all the good stuff, right? And that's why I wanted to make this video, because it's, at least for me, a cause for celebration. I wanted to celebrate it with you guys. But for the purposes of this video, right, it's not just a celebration. I wanted to make it something interesting. So I wanted to share what 10 years of psychotherapy brought me. What are the insights I've gained? How do I do this job differently? How is it different from what the student version of me thought it would be, and so much more. So this video is going to be much less structured than usual, if you can believe something like that, but I just feel that it's important to do one that's spontaneous and just is just more about feedback of experience. Anyway, so 10 years. 10 years is very interesting in this field that is psychology, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. Because in all three, 10 years of experience is virtually saying, I'm a junior, right? Unlike a lot of our career fields where 10 years experience, you're good at this, you're really at the top. Here, you're not even in the middle, you're not a junior, but you're not really up there either, right? So it's kind of a very strange place to be, right? Even though I'm celebrating it because I feel that it's a massive achievement. Yeah, in this field it's not the greatest of achievements. Still, I wanted to celebrate it. Anyway, coming back to the point, is that these 10 years have brought me an immense amount of knowledge, of understanding, and of, I feel, thoroughness. So the first understanding that I wanted to share with you is the fact that the psychologist, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, whatever, has the right not to know. And this is going to be very important because often people come to you thinking that you know everything. And perhaps this internet channel gives this false impression that I know absolutely everything there is to know. Absolutely not. Every day I realize how limited my knowledge is, and strangely enough, it's a beautiful experience, because that means that out there's still more information to get. It's still exciting, it's still new, it's never becomes boring, right? And that's one of the things that I found so enriching in this line of work, is that it's never, ever going to get to an ending point. There's never going to be a point of mastery of psychotherapy. It's just like a long, infinite road that you walk and walk and walk. And as you walk, you realize certain things in this field, in this path. But you never ever master the road. You're never the king of the road, so to speak. You're just like someone going through. And that's something that I find wonderful. Also, I've learned so many things that I'm just going to spread it out without any grandeur of importance. Just full-fledged spontaneousness and authenticness, right? So one of the main things that I've learned is also how much a patient knows about themselves. Because starting this line of work, I felt that the main job of the psychologist, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, I'm going to use psychologist, but that works for all the others, right? Is that I always was under the impression that the patient doesn't really know, and you have to help him try to get to understanding. But what I've realized is that most patients already know quite well their issues. They already know quite well where it comes from, what is the work to be done. And the more and more I've worked in this field, the more I've realized that it's not it's not like you're the up on top giving the orders down below. It's really teamwork. I often felt to myself that patients should not be called patients, clients, what have you. They should be called colleagues, because basically that's what you're both doing. You're working together to a common goal, of course, you as the therapist, you're like detached, you're not like giving your own issues to the patient to handle. But still, there's something that's much more equal, I have found, in psychotherapy than what it is presented when you do your studies. When you do your studies, it's always presented as you, psychologist, you know, the patient does not. And even in psychoanalysis, which is one of the fields I love the most, it's like, you don't know. And that's so very true. You, as a therapist, never know a priori what's happening. It's always, every new patient that comes in, you never know how it's going to go, what's going to happen, what insights you're going to gain, what insights the patient's going to gain, and how long the therapy will last. And that's what I find so incredible, is that it's always so rich. Like, there's patients that come in and you think, wonderful, we're going to do a great job, I already see the landscape, this is what we're going to work on, this is what we're going to focus on, and they stop coming after the third session. And on the flip side, there are people where you're like, oh, I'm really, really unsure. I really feel that this is going to be critical. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to help that person. And you do a brilliant work and you hold them so much in their lives. And the fact that it is unguessable is kind of part of the fun, right? You can never have a priori. If you have an a priori from the get-go, then it talks more about your feelings, your experience, and perhaps your countertransference than it talks about the reality of the clinical experience. So this was one of the things that I found so interesting. Also, one of the things that I've realized is how little fairies account for reality. Fairies are interesting. I love them. I love investigating them. I love thinking about them. I love sharing them. Who would have known, right? But I love it so much. Yet it never fully explains the reality of what is happening with a patient. You can have the most brilliant, top-notch, sophisticated fairy. It always kind of falls short of what is happening with the patient. And that's something that I find incredible. It forces us to have a humility of like, yeah, in the end, I don't really know what's happening. Like, I'm kind of guessing. Best case scenario, it's an educated guess, but even then, it's not truth. And I think that also, those years of clinical experience have taught me to be more distant from the truth. So here, when I'm talking about the truth, I'm not talking about subjective truth, like, for example, you feel something and you need to express it. But I'm talking more about like general universal truth of human psychology. When I ended the studies, I was like, oh well, we can explain everything. If we really get to it, then we can find out the truth and be scientific. 10 years after, I'm like, yeah, I don't care about the truth or science. I care about helping people. And I will do that in the best way possible. That doesn't mean that we know nothing, but that means that we don't know exactly what works. And that's what also I found very interesting. As when I started, I was convinced that certain methods work for certain types of patients. And a bit like what you see on the internet, that like a phobia is like best helped by CBT. Personality disorders are much better helped by psychoanalysis or DBT, and so on and so forth. But practicing, I realized that's not exactly true. It's not exactly accurate to the reality. The reality, at least what I've seen, is that it's the relationship, the psychotherapeutic alliance, or the transference, countertransference relationship that is primordial, rather than something that's established a priori. And I've also realized that you can't be a scientist as a psychotherapist. So this will be one of the most controversial statements that I'm going to make throughout perhaps my career, but I really do feel that when you're with someone, you are working things out. You're cutting corners with theory. You're not exactly doing what Freud would have done, Fernburn would have done, Otto Kernberg does, or any of the others, right? You're doing your stuff. in your manner. Like, you might be inspired by those people, and that's great, but you're doing it in your own singular way. And that singular way was that when I first started this field, I thought that was like wrong. Like, if you did it in your own specific way, then you would screw everything up. But no, if you do it in your own specific singular way with a patient and it matches and it works, then it's good. It's even healthy. What is unhealthy is like if you exploit, abuse, self-serving, and so on and so forth. But doing it your way, like adapting the theory to fit the clinic, is the best way to do it. It's the sane way to do it. It's also, and this is very important, 10 years, I mean, all of these revelations are gradual, right? It's not like 10-year anniversary, bang, all of this comes in, like it's gradual. But I realized how terrible dogma is. Like, if you're convinced that the patient needs to do something because it's in your theory, because everything proves it, or at least scientifically, then you've just slipped and just fallen on the path, because you're not supposed to be dogmatic. Dogma is there because schools need to train you in a certain specific way, and they don't really like you playing around with the concepts because they want to train you to do something. But truth is, with the patient, once you get down to it, is that you can't allow yourself to be dogmatic. Like, I mean, you have to allow yourself to some wiggle room with some theories to be able to really work with the patient. And you also have to let yourself be open to the fact of not knowing. So this is very important for me, because when I was younger, into the illusion that maybe, like, if I got all the theories, then I'll be able to map everything out and like nothing will be outside of my control. Foolish that I was, because this isn't what is happening. What is happening truly is that nothing is ever mapped out. You're never sure, you're always uncertain. And that uncertainty cannot be compensated by theory. Theory is what it is. It's like a map, but once you walk the walk, it's you and the walk. In this, if I were to extend the metaphor, basically, a map only shows you an abstract version of where you're supposed to go. But that doesn't show you all the detours, all of the nature, all of the other pedestrians that you're going to cross. All of these things the map doesn't show. And that's exactly what the theory is. It's something that like shows you the big overhaul, but doesn't show you the details. But those details are so incredibly important and impressive when you think about them, because they are what constitutes the walk. Like, you won't necessarily remember the map, but you will remember what you've experienced during the walk. And this is psychotherapy. It is the walk. Therefore, when you're sticking to the map, you're just like analyzing the map, but you're not experiencing the walk. And I think that that's something that needs to be taught to people that are studying this field, is that the map is useful when you're lost. It's useful if you want like an overview of where you're going, but it's not concretely useful with the patient. The patient might ask for certain theories, and when I was younger, I thought that you should never talk theory with a patient, that was like straying away. But some patients do actually enjoy and feel reassured by the theory. Not that you should turn the psychotherapeutic spaces like a training ground for psychologists, for analysts, and so on and so forth. No, absolutely not. Yeah, the guiding line is the suffering of the patient. That's what we follow, and that's what we work on. But if the patient wants to like have like a bit of information, a bit like a transitional object, well, why not? I mean, it doesn't define you. It doesn't mean that they know exactly where you're going. Or like those paranoid thoughts of like, if the patient knows, then he can screw it up. No, absolutely not. If he knows, then he can know and he can have fun with it, and he can even forget it, right? And that's the funny thing, is that when you start sharing psychology with patients, some of them forget it. Like, they're not even that interested. Like, they just ask you just for the fun of it, and they might get an answer. They might say, "Oh yeah, fun," but they won't necessarily investigate it further and beyond. Also, what I've found very important during those 10 years is also the question of disclosure. So I used to be very adamantly against it, thinking that if you share something of yourself with the patient, then the patient will have no space to project, no space to really see you as neutral, no space to reenact infantile or traumatic conflict on you. So nothing is further away from the truth. Disclosure kind of helps the relationship get started, stabilize, and on the whole expand. However, and this is important, self-disclosure isn't about like, oh well, let's say if I talk to a patient, oh I have a bad day, I need to talk to you about it. No, it's like something more kind of like a patient will say, do you have children? And you will be like, no, I don't. Why is it important to you? And this, even though the answer might be negative, still creates something in which the patient feels that he can verbalize something, that you're not just this cold, rigid, dogmatic analyst. You're someone which they have an exchange with. An exchange is a human exchange. Of course, the guiding line is always the suffering of the patient. Therefore, you're not going to self-disclose everything. And I think that also, at least in psychoanalysis, we have unfortunately used it as a scapegoat. Like self-disclosing is pathological, self-disclosing is like harming the patient, but it's not accurate. It doesn't harm the patient. And if the patient wants to project something onto you, oh well, he or she will. I mean, there's no stopping that either. And I think that that's also something that I've learned, is that what the patient needs to deploy, he will deploy it, regardless of what your theory is or what you're thinking about. If it needs to be said, it will be said. That is not hurt by disclosing certain elements at the demand of the patient, and in a limit, of course. Like, I mean, as once Irving Yalom said in an interview, of course not. If they like ask you your sexual preferences, you're not going to answer that because that's intrusive. But if they're going to ask you something like, well, have you been on holidays? Or do you feel rested? What fair is there, if not that the analyst might lose himself or be afraid of losing parts of himself in the relationship, but you don't, because it's a co-construction. A bit like a colleague. You won't share everything with a colleague, obviously not. But sometimes it's important, and I also think it's important to share those little elements for the individual for them to be able to project onto you afterwards. And you should only, of course, share what you're comfortable with. There's no point in sharing something you're deeply uncomfortable with, because that is complicated. And if you have patients that are manipulative, they can turn it against you. So it's not that great, but still. The overall thing is that I've learned so much in 10 years, and it's been wonderful. Working with patients is really, really super, incredibly enjoyable. It can be tiring because it really requires the clinician to be focused, to be there, to try and get the meat of the suffering, to try and help the patient to the maximum. So I'm not going to say that it's not tiring. It's very tiring as a job. Much more than what people expect, and much more than what I thought it would be. Because when I was younger, I thought that like it was going to be okay, that like it's gonna re-energize you, and to an extent it does. Intellectually, it's wonderful, but emotionally, you still have to work, and it's still a real job. So all those people out there, not that I think my audience is part of those, but all those people out there that think that it's not a real job, I'm sorry, it's very tiring and taxing. So I can definitely attest to that, and I realized it in the last 10 years. It's incredible, worthwhile, and very important, but it's still a job, right? That being said, also, what 10 years of psychotherapy have brought to me is this understanding that pricing of the sessions is paramount. Like, what I found is that in our day and age, very few people can afford what they used to afford in psychoanalysis 40, 50, 60 years ago, like 5 sessions a week, X amount of money. This is very rare nowadays, and so therefore there needs to be an adaptation, and I really do believe that of the clinician, on the people, that they need to find a good point in which the clinician needs to live and have a okay life, but the patient also needs to live and have an okay life themselves. So pricing of the sessions and a mutual agreement on the pricing is super important. Also, questions of setting. I have found throughout the years that with certain patients you can be a bit more flexible in terms of the setting, and some others no. It's something that I have found very complicated, because at least in my mind, everyone should be kind of equal. But I've realized that like equality is more equity. Like some people need the setting to be strict up because they can't invest emotionally, psychically, intellectually in something that's too flexible. And some other people, on the contrary, cannot invest the psychoanalysis or the psychotherapy if the setting is too rigid. So it's really like each time is an adaptation. Also, and this is a very important one, no one knows exactly. So even when you have a supervisor, even if you have other colleagues, they might say it's a mistake or this should never have been done, but they don't know. Fundamentally, except if you've hurt the patient physically, verbally, emotionally, and so on and so forth, what constitutes a mistake is really, and that I've found incredibly interesting, really up to debate. Because some things can seem like mistakes at the beginning, like for example, being late, and then afterwards, like the patient will say, well, when you were late, I realized something. So, to be honest, mistakes are not like an easy, completely, like I say, black and white sin. They're very nuanced, they always need discussion, thinking, and processing. So that's also something that's so incredibly important, which leads me to my last point, is the question of humility. In this job, we'll never know for certain. We don't know. We have theories, we have models to try and explain, but at the very core, we'll never 100% know. And I think that that's one of the most important lessons I have learned myself, that you should always be humble. Even if you're a psychiatrist working in a big name hospital, you don't know. Not more than me, not more than anyone else. Like you might know something if you're a psychiatrist of the medical domain. Like I, as a psychologist, know something of human psychology, statistically speaking. But when it comes to the individual, I don't. And I think there is a beauty in accepting that. There is something of a level in the playing field for both the patient and the clinician in this moment, that I accept that I know nothing, and I accept that you'll guide me as I'll guide you. We'll work together to try and meet a common goal in your therapy. And I think that that's something that's incredibly important and sometimes is not taught enough, especially in psychoanalytic schools, in which there is a right way and wrong way. Well, there is no right way. There may be wrong ways, but there is no like unilateral right way. There are only right ways, right? But like plural, multi-layered. And what is right with one patient with some form of psychopathology will be wrong for the same type of psychopathology, but for another patient. So it's incredibly rich. There is no full knowledge of humankind, and that's what makes it an incredible job, an incredible profession, is because it's a constant adaptation, a constant thinking, a constant reshaping of what we believe and what we think as clinicians, and a constant moment to self-reflect, because there is no end game. It's only continuing to think about psychotherapy, reflections, and the process. But there is no end point in which we have mastered the road. We only ever are the pedestrians and the walkers of the road. That pretty much sums up my 10-year anniversary video of psychotherapy. I hope you enjoy it. And if you want to participate in the comments, feel free to do so. Please feel free to continue as you are doing in your own process. I'll see you in the next one.